America contains almost 200,000 miles of public roads, and every inch of those roadways is built and maintained by people just like you. The engineers and workers who make it possible for drivers to get where they're going, in all conditions and over all types of terrain. Building and maintaining our ever-growing web of highways and byways is a full-time job. But a well-made and well-maintained road isn't your only responsibility. Whether it's a 2-lane blacktop or a 10-lane super expressway, the grading and the gravel and all the other hundreds of tasks all come second. For roadway workers, when working in and around traffic, safety is job number one. Safety is a task that belongs to everyone, from the flaggers to the engineers. Every worker on a job site is responsible for helping to maintain the highest level of safety possible. We're going to go over some of the risks that workers like you face every single day, and the things you can do to make sure that you'll get home safely when your shift is over. Trenching creates a special set of hazards on any job site. A trench is simply any excavation that is deeper than it is wide. A trench can present a variety of risks. The most obvious risk is that of a cave-in or partial collapse, in which workers can be buried. Trenches can also contain buildup of water in their bottom and can become filled with toxic or flammable gases. Most workers who deal with any kind of trench work will have received special training for these tasks, but it's important to remember some basics, including the most important fact. Any excavation deeper than 5 feet requires some sort of reinforcement, whether benching, shoring, shielding, or some other form of support. Trenches need to be inspected for safety at least once a day by a person designated by your employer. And no worker within a trench should ever be more than 25 feet from an escape ladder. Lastly, no heavy equipment should be operating near the trench walls. Fall prevention is a critical set of safety practices for a wide range of construction projects, and roadway construction is no exception. Falls can be a danger in the presence of an elevated workspace, but they're also possible when working at ground level near excavations or utility access manholes. Even debris left carelessly on the ground in a work area can result in a fall that leaves the victim badly injured. Ensuring that walkways are safe and clear of debris and fluids is a simple way to protect against these ground level hazards. When elevated work is required, such as on bridges or elevated formwork, guardrails are the minimum safety requirement. You may also find that you need to wear fall arrest gear and utilize 3-point anchoring systems. Any job site that includes elevated work should have a 100% fall protection program in place. The fact that electricity can kill suddenly and without warning is well known to any experienced construction worker. Electrical hazards can exist in lines overhead or beneath the ground, or in faulty or improperly wired equipment. The first and simplest step for protecting yourself from electrical hazards is to never work around electrical sources unless you're fully trained and have reason to be there. When your work requires proximity to an electrical line, the utility company should mark, flag, and shield any lines that might create a risk. In the case of underground lines, remember that the marks might not be exact, and try to maintain at least a 2-foot buffer between excavations and any flags or marks. Always assume that any electrical line is live. If the line must be kept live, make sure that all equipment remains at least 10 feet away from it, and use spotters to make sure that this buffer is maintained. Remember, 10 feet is the least space for this buffer. In the case of lines carrying over 750 kilovolts, the required distance is 45 feet, and all of these distances increase when the weather creates damp conditions. Any equipment operators or drivers who have reason to be near the line should follow a traffic pattern that will keep them a safe distance away. If a vehicle should happen to come in contact with the power line, all other workers should stay away from the vehicle, and the operator should remain inside it until the line is de-energized. If you operate construction equipment, you have a large responsibility for your own safety and for the safety of the workers around you. Before beginning any work involving equipment, do a walk-around inspection and check all systems. Because there are so many different kinds and models of equipment, familiarity is a major key to safe operation. Locate and test all controls, including backup alarms and other safety devices. Know your blind spots and how they might shift during work. Be sure to report all repair needs to your supervisor, no matter how minor they may seem. If a piece of equipment is unsafe to operate, follow the correct lockout and tagout procedures to prevent other workers from inadvertently using the equipment. Just as awareness and alertness are the first layers of defense for all workers, they're important when operating any type of equipment, whether heavy or light. Don't use cell phones or music players. Your hearing is an essential part of your awareness. The only exception to this rule is communication equipment issued by your supervisor, such as a walkie-talkie. Because construction work can pose such a grave threat to life and limb, smaller injuries such as sprains are often overlooked. Yet 43% of the lost workdays in roadway construction are due to sprains or strains. These injuries are usually caused by the awkward and incorrect lifting of heavy objects or equipment, or long-term repetitive work, such as rebar tying. You can minimize your exposure to these sorts of injuries by remembering a few simple rules. For instance, make use of dollies or hoists when moving or lifting heavy objects. Something that may not seem so heavy at the beginning of a day may be more dangerous than you think, especially as the workday wears on and you grow more weary. Of course, dollies and hand trucks aren't the only kinds of help available for lifting. You shouldn't be shy about asking a coworker to lend a hand with a heavy or awkward load. You should also make use of PPE, such as shoulder and knee pads, to cushion you against pressure injuries. Breaks and rotation from one type of task to another can also make a critical difference in your exposure to these types of risks. All construction workers need to be diligent in protecting their hearing. Hearing loss is a particularly deceptive hazard in any area of work because it happens so slowly, and because its cause can be noise that doesn't seem especially loud, but does slow and persistent damage within a particular range of hearing. For instance, most people would understand that they need hearing protection when operating a pile driver, but fewer might realize that hearing protection is equally important because of something as seemingly innocent as the persistent sound of passing traffic. Often, by the time a worker realizes that he is at risk for hearing loss, the loss has already occurred. It's important to note that hearing loss isn't an all-or-nothing situation. Most cases of hearing loss involve the loss of a particular range of sounds. For example, a typical victim of hearing loss might hear low and middle frequencies just fine, but high frequencies become distorted or completely inaudible. In addition to hearing loss, some workers also suffer from tinnitus, the perception of sound in the ears or head where no external source is present. Most commonly described as a constant ringing in the ears, advanced forms of tinnitus are permanent. Some equipment can be made safer with sound-insulating shields, and your employer should provide a range of personal protective equipment that will guard you against this threat. Depending upon the level of noise on the job site, the correct PPE might be anything from soft earplugs to earmuffs. It's also a good idea to have your hearing tested regularly to make certain that your PPE is performing as it should. Many types of construction work involve potential exposure to dangerous or toxic substances, from asbestos to PCBs and many others. Hazardous materials can enter your body in any of three ways: by inhaling them into your respiratory system, by accidentally ingesting them through your mouth, or by absorbing them through your skin. One of the most prevalent materials in construction is silica dust. Silica dust is an unavoidable byproduct of working with concrete or rock, and long-term inhalation of this dust can lead to a variety of illnesses. Silica dust on a job site can be reduced with frequent wetting of surfaces, and if this proves insufficient, workers can protect themselves with filters and respirators. Another hazardous material that is hard to avoid is asphalt. Asphalt fumes can be dangerous, as can contact with the material itself. Asphalt work should occur upwind of the asphalt whenever possible, and the working temperature of the asphalt should be kept as low as is practical to minimize fumes. The use of ventilation on paving machines is another safeguard. And of course, workers should wear gloves and long sleeves to protect themselves from burns. Wet concrete can be similarly harmful, and lengthy contact can produce uncomfortable rashes and other forms of dermatitis. Be careful to have any cuts or scrapes well covered before working with wet concrete. And again, make sure you use gloves and long sleeves. These are only a few of the possible hazardous substances with which you might come in contact. Others include different kinds of paints, solvents, and fuels. Every job site should include material safety data sheets, or MSDSs, that provide details about each substance's risks and the ways in which to work safely with that substance. You are your own best monitor for your health, and if you begin to feel ill, report your condition to your supervisor. Anyone who regularly works outdoors must pay careful attention to the various hazards posed by the environment itself. Summer heat and winter cold can be as dangerous as any of the other hazards we've discussed. In the past few years, a great deal has been learned about the dangers posed by overexposure to the sun's rays, and the ways in which careless exposure can develop into skin cancer. These risks have something in common with hearing loss. They can develop slowly, and by the time they're noticed, it can be too late. Anyone who works outside regularly must protect himself from the sun with long sleeves, broad-brimmed hats, polarized safety glasses, and sunscreens with a sun protection factor of 20 or higher, applied every 2 to 3 hours. Hot weather can also accelerate dehydration, which can lead to heat stress, heat exhaustion, or heat stroke. Warning signs include weakness or fatigue, dizziness, confusion, nausea, clammy skin, and pale or flushed complexion. The best defense against all heat-related hazards is to wear the appropriate clothing. Stay well hydrated by drinking at least 2 to 3 quarts of water each day, and scheduling work so that it happens during cooler times of the day, or at least so that workers rotate regularly and are allowed to recover every couple of hours. Cold can be as dangerous as heat. Prolonged exposure to cold weather can result in hypothermia, frostbite, and even death. Proper clothing is your best defense against these hazards. Make sure your clothing is layered, and make sure to include gloves, head covering, and wool socks. Warm liquids also help, as do breaks in warmer areas. Failure to follow these safe practices can result in hypothermia, which begins with shivering, fatigue, and the loss of coordination, and progresses to include blue skin and loss of consciousness. In extreme cases, the body shuts off the flow of blood to extremities in an attempt to keep its core temperature warm enough. When this occurs, the extremities are at risk for frostbite, which can, in its worst case, result in the loss of the extremity. Careful attention to safe work habits will prevent this from occurring. Roadway work always occurs in a specific area that is defined as the worksite design or activity area. The worksite or activity area is usually defined at the perimeter by what are called traffic control devices, or TCDs, ranging from orange cones to concrete barriers. In addition, the outer boundaries of the work zone are often maintained by static signs, or portable, changeable message signs, or human flaggers who help direct traffic around and through the area. Two important elements of any worksite design are its traffic patterns. The Traffic Control Pattern, or TCP, is the set of paths to be taken by motorists either around or through the worksite. The Internal Traffic Control Pattern, or ITCP, is for all traffic within the work area. everything from the parking areas for workers arriving on the job to the paths designated for earth movers and other large equipment. It is vital that all roadway workers on any job site, large or small, understand the basic layout of their worksite design, with special attention to the TCP and the ITCP. Equipment operators in particular must have this knowledge firmly in hand. A disturbing number of injuries and fatalities on roadway job sites are the results of accidents that are called runovers, in which a worker is injured or killed by being struck by a vehicle or a moving piece of equipment. Workers have to remain aware of their surroundings at all times, constantly checking the area visually, as well as listening for warnings. You're not just watching out for yourself. Constant vigilance means watching out for your coworkers as well. Of course, awareness isn't the only requirement to avoid runover hazards. Workers must strive to maintain a safe distance from traffic and stay safely behind barriers whenever possible. You must also wear the correct personal protective equipment, or PPE. This includes the correct class of safety vest or clothing. Safety vests are placed into one of three classes, depending upon the speed of the traffic around the worker. When traffic is limited to 25 miles per hour or slower, the correct PPE is Class 1. For speeds between 25 and 50 miles per hour, Class 2 PPE is required. And for speeds over 50 miles per hour, workers must wear Class 3 PPE. In addition to the correct class of vest or clothing, brightly colored headgear is essential. A dull gray hard hat doesn't provide nearly as much visual warning to a motorist as blaze orange. Passing motorists certainly aren't the only runover hazard on a roadway worksite. Construction equipment can be even more dangerous, not just because of its size, but because within the protective barriers, workers sometimes suffer from a false sense of security. Be careful to stay out of any equipment operator's blind spots. Communicate with operators only by radio or after establishing eye contact. Do not approach any piece of equipment until the operator has acknowledged you. A particular job with a high risk of runover hazard is the placement of TCDs, such as cones. When doing such work, be sure to wear a Class 3 vest and to try to perform the task when traffic is light. If possible, work from a platform on a job site vehicle. Stay in communication with your driver and, whenever possible, use a shadow vehicle to warn approaching motorists. Of all the different kinds of roadway workers, flaggers may be at the greatest risk of injury because they are at the front lines of the job site, helping to control the flow of regular traffic through or around the worksite. The ironic fact is that a work zone that adds risks for any driver often makes impatient drivers speed up and drive even more recklessly than normal. Even careful and conscientious drivers may not fully understand work zone hazards. For instance, most people who would consider themselves safe drivers don't realize that an extra 10 miles per hour of speed, the difference between 55 and 65 miles per hour, can add almost 60 feet to the distance needed to stop. The flagger is one of the workers most likely to be exposed to this danger. To counteract these risks, the flagger must always wear high visibility protective equipment, including reflective equipment when light is poor. Brightly colored or reflective headgear is also essential. The flagger must be certain to be alert at all times. Even when traffic seems light or conditions seem calm, things can change with no warning. And maintaining your attention and your alertness could be the critical difference between safety and injury. Don't engage other workers in casual conversation. Don't listen to music on headphones or talk on a cell phone. Devote all of your senses to awareness of your environment. A careful flagger will always have an escape route for emergencies. Being alert to problems isn't enough if you can't escape them. Reliable communication with other flaggers is also essential. All the flaggers in a particular area need to be sure they're on the same page when it comes to their control of traffic. Flaggers need to make sure that their signals to motorists don't conflict with existing traffic signals. If a particular signal needs to be disabled, Let your supervisor know immediately. Finally, treat all motorists with courtesy and respect, whether you believe they deserve it or not. If they seem angry, don't respond to their anger or engage them in arguments. If a law is broken, notify the police immediately. Roadway workers are frequently required to work at night, and night work carries its own particular risks. There are obvious hazards that arise from the darkness of a nighttime working environment. Poor visibility makes things harder for everyone, including motorists and workers. These difficulties can be partially counteracted by both strong sources of artificial light, as well as specialized personal protective equipment for the workers, including reflective vests and gear. However, visibility problems are not the only hazards that arise from night work. If the project is a lengthy one, you may find yourself working nighttime shifts for several days, weeks, or even months. Learning to work when the rest of the world sleeps, and vice versa, is not easy, and it can result in fatigue and difficulty in maintaining your focus. Total awareness is necessary on any job site, and it's even more important to help you navigate the additional hazards of night work. But nighttime happens to be the time that this awareness can be the most difficult to muster. Your knowledge of this challenge is the first step toward meeting it. The hours required by night work can also disrupt your family or social circumstances. This can cause additional stress, which can steal your attention when it needs to be totally on the task at hand. Problems with communication can also arise. Each shift needs to communicate clearly with the shifts before and following it, to make sure that everyone has whatever information will help them stay safe and productive. The arrangement of traffic control devices may also change as visibility lessens, whether because of a setting sun or because of bad weather. Cones or drums may be spaced more closely. Signs and warning lights may be repositioned. And care should be taken that any warning lights stand out in sharp contrast to the work lights. The traffic control setup should also be test-driven frequently, to help ensure that motorists are receiving all the information and guidance they need. Roadway construction sites require that we all make safety our #1 priority. Safe work habits keep workers healthy and on the job, and increased productivity is the natural result. Follow the guidelines we've discussed here, as well as those set forth by your employer, and you'll be well on your way to ensuring that everyone can work safely in the zone.